Okay, here we go. Benjamin, verse 27, chapter 49, verse 27. Benjamin is a wolf. He will prey. In the morning, he will devour plunder. In the evening, he will divide the spoil. Okay, so what are we talking about? Why is Benjamin a wolf? What is he devouring? What is the morning? What is the evening? All these matters are up for debate by the various commentators. Rashi brings various interpretations. Um, I think we'll start with Rashi. We'll read this whole Rashi if we think about it, because it's a lot to cover, but we begin. So no need for introduction. Benjamin is a wolf, he will prey. He is a wolf for he will prey. He, Jacob, prophesied that they were destined to be grabbers. Quote, and you shall grab for yourselves each man his wife, in the book of Judges, in the episode of the concubine who happened to be in Giv'ah. This is a very strange episode. And it's even stranger to say that this is the story that Jacob is alluding to. So what's the story? One of the most tragic stories in the book of Judges, before there was a king in Israel. And in a way, before there was a king in Israel, so there's no central form of power, in a way that gives a lot of room for anarchy. And that's what the verse in the book of Samuel, in the book of Judges says at least once. It says it multiple times. In those days, there is no king in Israel. Each person does what is right and just in their eyes. And there's a terrible story in the book of Judges, probably one of the worst stories in the entire book, maybe in the entire Bible. Basically, there's this guy, a Levite, and he has a concubine, and his concubine they were trying to stay over at a place in the territory of Benjamin, and ultimately his concubine was violated, and they were not hospitable to them. They didn't let them into their homes. His wife and this woman was violated, and ultimately she died because of the terrible violence. This man was so shaken up, and he wanted to shake up the rest of the people. So sounds a little harsh, but he cuts the corpse into 12, and he sends one part of the corpse to each of the 12 tribes, and he says, "This is what happened in the territory of Benjamin." And the people of Israel were shaken up, and they sent troops to Benjamin, and they say, "Give us the give us the criminals." And Benjamin, as in a tribal society, by the way, they're protecting the members of their tribe. They're not thinking about what's right or wrong. They're thinking about in terms of tribalism of we want to protect the members of our tribe. So they refuse to hand over the criminals. So the rest of the tribes say, we are going to go to battle. And there was a civil war, and they wiped out most of the tribe of Benjamin. Male Benjaminites, there were like 400 left, if I remember correctly. And before the battle, the rest of the members of the rest of the people made an oath, and they said, none of us is going to give our daughters to the tribe of Benjamin. So they put down this terrible. They said the civil war basically is over, and it's won decisively by the rest of the tribes. And there's 400 Israelites left. There's 400 Benjaminites left, and now we have a big problem in that there's going to be a tribe that's going to be erased from the Jewish people, because Benjamin no one can marry them, because everyone made an oath that they're not going to give their daughters to Benjamin. So what the people come up with a plan is they say, you know what? We're on page 283. People come up with a plan, and they say, you know what we're going to do? We are going to let our daughters dance in the fields, and let the Benjaminites come and grab, quote unquote, grab women that they could marry. And like this, we're not violating our oath, because we're not giving our our daughters to the tribe of Benjamin. The tribe of Benjamin are taking our daughters. And that's how the tribe was saved. Okay, this is a terrible story. Some people say, at least the modern commentators say, this is actually placed in the Bible in a way as justification for kings, right? Because after the book of Judges, you get Samuel who appoints the king, and toward the end of the book, you have this story. And the point is, this is what happens when you don't have a king. You get this terrible calamity, and then you get the civil war that follows, and it's a terrible story. So now, what's so strange about this terrible story is that Rashi is saying that the blessing, well, Rashi doesn't make it up himself. Where does he get it from? 27. Rashi gets it from Tanchuma. Rashi gets it from the Medrash. So Rashi is saying that when Jacob wants to bless Benjamin, and he says Benjamin is a devouring wolf, predatory wolf, then that's sort of a praise and that's sort of a way of blessing. It's certainly a blessing, says Rashi in the first interpretation. What is the story referring to? It's referring to the tribe of Benjamin when they grab their wives in the episode of the concubine of Giva. This makes no sense. Why is that a positive? Why is that something good? So that's the big question for this morning. The answer is harder, but no, that's the question. Right? You would presume that if it's a blessing, it's going to be something good. So there's a beautiful Hasidic interpretation from the Rebbe. And the Rebbe says as follows. I have to open my notes to look at it more in detail. But the big picture is at the blessing that Binyamin Ze'ev Yitraf, Benjamin is a predatory wolf, a wolf that, I wonder if there's another translation here. Benjamin is a wolf, he will prey. And Rashi says sort of he grabs, so there's an act of violence. The Rebbe offers an interpretation that what we're talking about here is we're talking about the power of repentance. In other words, one blessing is that a person is relatively in the proper zone and doesn't fail. A greater blessing, perhaps, and maybe this is why this is the final blessing of all the 12 sons. The Benjamin is the final blessing. Verse 27, the greatest blessing is that even if a person or a tribe or a culture fails so terribly, like the people of Benjamin in the story of the concubine and Giva, so they fall so terribly that they're willing to harbor the people who violated this woman and killed this woman, and they're willing to go to civil war to protect and harbor the criminals. And yet they would fall so low, and yet they can turn around and rebuild. And how do we know they turned around and they rebuild? Because the rest of the tribes wanted to save the tribe of Benjamin. The rest of the tribes wanted to perpetuate the tribe of Benjamin. So that shows that those people have repented, because otherwise the tribe of Benjamin would want to. Otherwise, the tribe of Benjamin would want to. The word I'm looking for is wouldn't want to seek to save them. So this represents the power of teshuvah, that the people of Benjamin are able to transform, even though they are in a difficult spiritual position. And in some ways, that's the greatest blessing that you could think about. So that's, generally speaking, the perspective, the Hasidic perspective of why Rashi would quote this as a blessing, even though it seems like it's a terrible story, probably, like, as I mentioned, one of the most terrible stories in the Bible. So why would that be referenced here? And the answer would be because the reference here is not to the sin. The reference is to the power of teshuvah, of repentance, of transformation. Okay, now we continue with the poetry here. Rashi continues and says it offers another interpretation. Well, I don't think it's a contradiction. It could be to different close of the verse. So let's look at this carefully for 1 second. But Binyamin Ze'ev Yitraf, in the morning, I'm sorry, Benjamin is a wolf, he will prey. And then Rashi offers another interpretation. And this is really more in line with the other blessings of the other tribes, talking about the leadership of the Jewish people. And here Rashi says we're talking about, of course, King Saul, Shaul, because Shaul was from the tribe of Benjamin, and he devours in the sense that he's a military warrior. And of course, he went to battle with the Philistines, as the verses in the book of Samuel explain at great length, not just Philistines, but Rashi quotes Moab, Edom, and wherever he would go, he would be successful. So let's read the second half of Rashi. And Benjamin, a wolf, he will pray. It's on the screen. And he prophesied about Saul, that he would be victorious over his enemies all around. As it is said, and Saul took the kingdom, and he waged war against Moab and against the children of Ammon and against Edom, etc. And wherever he turned, he caused them to tremble. So this makes sense because it makes sense. I mean, it's consistent with what we had earlier in the blessings of Jacob, where Jacob is looking and talking about the future leadership positions of the various tribes. So the first king is from the tribe of Benjamin, King Shaul. So of course, Rashi says that when it says he's a devouring wolf, it refers both to, well, he says the first is even before the kings in the era of the judges. It refers to the tribe of Benjamin, who are grabbing, quote unquote, grabbing their wives. That represents Teshuvah, as we mentioned. And the second interpretation is we're talking about King Shaul. And based on that, we're going to talk about the morning and the evening. And this is very, very, very poetic. Morning and evening, because those are the two clauses in the verse. The verse says, in the morning, he will devour plunder, and in the evening, he will divide the spoil. So what's the morning and the evening? So Rashi says the morning is the beginning of the emergence of the kingdom in Israel, right? So the morning, it means the beginning, right? In Hebrew, the name of east, there's two words for east. One word is Mizrach, right? And Mizrach comes from the word Zoreach, the sun shining, because that's the direction where the sun shines from. But another word for Mizrach is Kedem. You say it in the blessings of the wedding, Began Eden Mikedem, the Garden of Eden. And I hear it's tricky. It could be from the east, because Kedem is east, but Kedem also comes from the word Kodem, earlier, because the early morning starts in the east, and then the sun rises and goes to the west. So the beginning of the Jewish history, or the history of the Jewish kingdom, is the morning. And what's the evening? The evening is once the sun sets. So Rashi says once the sun sets, that refers to the end of the Jewish kingdom, and that is, of course, at the destruction of the temple, when Nebuchadnezzar destroys the temple and exiles the Jewish people. So what's the great blessing? So let's see, what's the great blessing? Says Rashi, we have 2 points here. Says Rashi, I'm going to read the Rashi here. In the morning, he will devour plunder. Okay, we'll leave that alone because the Rashi addresses the word ad. What does ad mean? Ad is an expression of plunder and spoils, translated into the Aramaic as ad-da'ah. There is another example of its use in Hebrew. Then plunder and booty, ad shalal, were divided. Okay, we'll leave that alone. He, Jacob, is referring to Saul, who arose at the beginning of the morning and sunrise of Israel, from Esther Rabbah, from the Medrash Rabbah on Esther. So the morning is the beginning of the Jewish kingdom. That's Saul, and that's where Saul rises in the beginning. But then, and in the evening, he will divide the spoils, says Rashi, even when the sun will set for Israel. Through Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king who destroyed the first temple, who will exile them to Babylon, he, Benjamin, will divide the spoil. Where do you see Benjamin dividing the spoil? So Mordechai and Esther, who were of the tribe of Benjamin, will divide the spoils of Haman, as it is said in the book of Esther, in the scroll of Esther, behold, the house of Haman I have given to Esther. And that comes from a Medrash Rabbah on Esther. So this is very poetic and very beautiful. The verse says when Jacob wants to bless his son Benjamin, he says, in the morning he will devour plunder, and in the evening he will divide the spoil. What's morning and what's evening? Morning is the beginning of the Jewish kingdom. That's Saul. Saul is a descendant of Benjamin. And Saul, of course, devours the plunder in the sense that he overpowers the enemies. But then the bigger idea is, even in other words, the more interesting point, in a way, the bigger chidush, the bigger novelty, is even in the evening, even once the sun sets over the Jewish kingdom, the Jewish people have no independent power. They're in exile. They're in Babylonia, which then becomes Persia. And ultimately they're persecuted, but then ultimately they overpower. And then who rules the Jewish people at the time, or who leads the Jewish people at the time? It is Mordechai and Esther of the tribe of Benjamin. That's what it says clearly in the Megillah. Ish Yehudi, there's a Jewish man in Shushan Abira, quotes Mordechai, goes his father, and it tells you his genealogy, Ish Yemini, a Benjaminite man, right? So we know some Benjamin. So we're saying that even at the end, even when the sun sets, he will still divide the spoil, and that refers to the house of Haman, which according to the Megillah, explicitly in the Megillah, was given to Mordechai and Esther, and that's the spoil that they divide. That is the first interpretation that we have from Rashi. Rashi offers another interpretation, and the reason why Rashi needs another interpretation is because most of these blessings do not refer to the events after the exile, during the exile. If you look at the previous states, if you look at the previous blessings, most of the blessings refer to the Jewish people when they're settled in the land. So this interpretation is an anomaly, that in the evening, we're talking about Jacob is giving a blessing for the eventual destruction. Hopefully there will not be a destruction. So in Jacob's blessing, up to this point, we didn't hear of any destruction, right? We heard about the point leading up to the kings and then the era of the kings, but that's about it. So here we're introducing a new concept that Jacob is also prophesizing about the time after the destruction of the temple. So that's sort of a little bit out of the model of the other blessings. And perhaps that's why Rashi offers another interpretation from Onkelos. And he says, no, we're not talking about the Jewish people in exile. What we are talking about, Onkelos, however, rendered it as regarding the spoils of the priests, i.e. the holy things of the temple, namely the priest's share of the sacrifices. So that's what Onkelos says. Onkelos is the first Aramaic translation of the Torah, printed in most versions of the Torah, and it's very old, it's very ancient, about almost 800 years before Rashi. And here he says, Rashi talks about, Onkelos says, Binyamin. I'm just going to read it. It's much more of a commentary in this context than a translation. He says, when it says Binyamin Ze'evi Traf, in his, Benjamin will be a devouring wolf, says the Onkelos, Benjamin, in his land, the divine presence will dwell, and the temple will be built in his inheritance. In the morning and in the evening, the priests are going to offer the offerings, and in the evening and at night, they divide the portions of the animals, of the sacrifices that the priests eat. Right? So this is an entirely different interpretation, because based on this interpretation, we're not talking about the era of after the exile. We're talking about during the building of a temple. Morning and evening is the priests offering the temple, offering the offerings in the temple, and then the dividing. The plunder represents the idea that the priests divide the parts of the animal that the priests receive. So these are the two interpretations of how to read the final blessing of Jacob, the blessing to Benjamin. I just want to say, historically, not everybody knows this. It's more people know that Jerusalem is in the domain of Benjamin, of Judah. Most people know that the temple was built in Judah's territory, but the reality is that Jerusalem is actually on the border between Judah and Benjamin. And in fact, most people on the temple itself, the border between Judah and Benjamin runs in the temple itself. And the Mizbeach, the altar, is in the part of Benjamin, and the other parts of the temple is in the part of Judah. So it's almost like the debate of where to put the capital. And finally, they carved out their own city, Washington, D.C. In some ways, Jerusalem is also its own district, and there's certain laws that make Jerusalem sort of the universal city. But the idea that you want to put it at the border of Judah and Benjamin is very interesting, because if you think about it historically, when King David became the king, and King David was from the tribe of, we have to go back here. I'm sorry, we're getting a little distracted here, but we have to go back here. There's this historical rift in the family between Rachel and Leah, and the descendants of Rachel and Leah. And Judah is the descendant of Leah, son of Leah, and Benjamin is the descendant of Rachel, right? And this rift goes back hundreds of years to the days of Jacob. Hundreds of years later, you have Shaul, the first king from Benjamin, Rachel's son. Saul loses the kingship, and it's given to David of the tribe of Judah, Leah's son. So this rivalry between Rachel and Leah is multi-generational. The trauma is multi-generational. And now you could imagine that there's sort of this fear of a divide between the Jewish people, between the camp of Rachel and Leah, and especially now when the kingdom was taken from one and given to another. And if you think about it, where Judah lived, so what happens when David becomes the king? The first thing he does, he's the king. The first place where he's a king, he is a king in Hebron. Hebron is in the center of the territory of Judah. That's a very safe place for a king from the tribe of Judah to be a king, is in Hebron. You're surrounded by the hills of Hebron. You're in your own tribal territory, and everything is fine. And he's the king in Hebron for 7 years. But then he wants to unite the kingdom. So what do? He moves the capital from Hebron to where? To literally the territory of Benjamin. The territory of Benjamin is the territory of the rival king who he took over. In other words, he became, I want to say, yeah, they were rivals for a point. The end of Saul's life, they were rivals, as is well known. But in other words, he succeeds Saul and sort of transfers the kingdom from the house of Benjamin to the house of Judah. But he now moves because he wants to unite the rift. He actually brings the capital and the spiritual capital of the Jewish people. He is the one who selects, well, forget about the temple. He becomes the king in Jerusalem. He moves his capital to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is the border of Judah and Judah and Benjamin. And in some ways, he's signaling to the people that he's not the king of the tribe, he's the king of the rest of the people. And he's going to the place of Benjamin. So that's very interesting. Why am I saying this now? I don't remember. I'm saying this because the temple is literally at the border of Judah and Benjamin with the altar where the offerings are brought literally in the territory of Benjamin, whereas the rest of the temple was in the territory of Judah. Okay. So just to sum up this point here right now, there's two ways to read the blessing to Benjamin. Rashi, I'm just thinking out loud here. I know why Rashi prefers, because he's living in the exile. There's two ways you can read this blessing. And there's two ways you can think about it. One way to think about it is that this blessing is referring to things that are only positive. And that's Onkelus's interpretation. Benjamin is the devouring wolf. He is meaning the altar, which devours the offerings. They offer offerings in the morning and in the evening, because the daily offerings, we know there was one in the morning, one in the afternoon. And in the evening, they also divide the spoils. The priests divide the parts of the temple. The priests divide the parts of the offerings offered on the temple in the territory of Benjamin. What could be more beautiful than the blessing to Benjamin, talking about the time of the temple? That's the second interpretation. That's Onkelus's interpretation. Rashi's first interpretation, as we mentioned the last, 25 minutes, he's looking for the interpretation that is actually less tranquil. He's looking for the interpretation where there are difficulties and seeing the beauty in the difficulty. And that's why he says morning and evening is not the morning and evening in the temple. It's the beginning of the Jewish story. It's the beginning of the kingdom of the Jewish people with Saul, but it's also the end. We're talking about the exile. This is a reference to the story of Mordechai and Esther, which had a happy ending, relatively speaking, but it was a time of persecution of the Jewish people. And even in the time of the persecution of the Jewish people, the Mordechai and Esther, descendants of Benjamin, they're able to divide the spoils because the verse says they get the spoils, they get Haman's home. So it's looking for the positive, looking for the blessing, even amidst very difficult circumstances. And certainly the first interpretation of Rashi, as we mentioned at some length earlier, that Benjamin is a devouring wolf. Again, after the Civil War, when the tribes tried to annihilate Benjamin, justifiably so, maybe, perhaps. But ultimately, there were 400 men left and the tribe has to be saved. The tribe of Benjamin could transform, could repent, to the point that the rest of the tribes tried to save them, and they allowed their daughters to be taken, quote unquote, by the tribe of Benjamin to perpetuate the tribe. That's also the blessing that Rashi is looking for, the blessing that even in difficult circumstances, they could turn around and they could transform. Now, why does Rashi say that? Because I don't know, but I'm just thinking here, sitting here in Greenwich, Connecticut, thinking about Rashi living in France and Germany under a certain degree of persecution. So he's looking for the inspiration, perhaps, and he's looking for the blessing that even in darker times, even in difficult times, there can be transformation, both personal and national. And that's what he celebrates as the final blessing of the blessings of the children of Jacob blessing his children. So that is the big that's what we want to say about Benjamin. This brings to the conclusion the specific blessings that Jacob offers to his sons. Comments, questions, welcome. Also disagreements and jokes. But in any case, any comments are welcome. Otherwise, we continue. But as always, just because we move forward doesn't mean we're not going to go back. We always reserve the right to do one step forward and two steps back because there's always more to say.
Rabbi?
Yes. Good morning, Doctor. How are you?
Well, it's a challenging morning, but I won't bore the rest of you with it. My question is this: is it obvious to everybody, perhaps not to me until this moment, that the purpose of a blessing is to provide inspiration?
Yeah, so a blessing is tricky. A blessing is to provide inspiration, correct? Once you get to the Kabbalistic interpretation of blessing, then there becomes a distinction between blessing and prayer. And it becomes interesting because I'm tying into your words of inspiration. I definitely think that's the right word, but I just want to put it in context. The difference between prayer and blessing from the Kabbalistic perspective is that prayer is aspirational. Prayer is, we don't have it yet. We want this to come about. We don't have it yet. We ask God, please give us something we don't have. Please heal the sick. Please bless the produce. These are things that we don't have yet, but we're asking for something to occur. Even in the words of the prayer, Yehi Ratzon, may it be your will. What does that mean? Up till now, it's not God's will. We want a new will created, right? It happens. Sometimes your kids give you new wills. You woke up Sunday morning, you wanted to sit on the beach chair, but the kids say, no, we're going to go play baseball. Okay, now you have a new will, right? So you can have a new will. Blessing, according to the Kabbalah, is much more of revealing the potential that you already have. The word bracha has basically two meanings. To talk about the etymology of the word, they're related. One is to draw down, and one is a pool. In modern Hebrew, a brecha, in Hebrew of the Mishnah and Talmud as well, but even in modern Hebrew, a brecha is a swimming pool. So a blessing is your pool of potential that you already possess. And the blessing is helping you bring it into fruition, making it practical. And that's why the Talmud says a blessing from anybody is effective. He says even a simple person's blessing should not go, you should respect anybody's blessing because a blessing is not something that has to be created. And then you need divine power, unique divine power. No, blessing is somebody sees that you have a potential and gives you a blessing and says, I'm giving you a blessing that you should achieve that which you already can achieve. So in that sense, it's inspirational. It also directs you to achieving your goal. So when Jacob blesses his child, first of all, is to think about, we said this earlier, I'm saying, when we started the blessings, the most important skill is to really think about the uniqueness of each child, and you don't give a generic blessing. Jacob doesn't give a generic blessing. Maybe in the next verse he does, verse 28. It depends how you read 28. It could be a generic blessing, could be something else. We'll talk about that later. So there's a generic blessing, but there's a specific blessing. So to help your child reach his or her potential, the first thing you have to know is what is her potential, or what is her skills, or what is his strengths. And once you identify those strengths, you verbalize it and you tell them, I believe in you. I believe that this is within your ability to reach. And that's on one hand, the inspiration that the child gets to pursue those, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's all within the blessing. And like I said, and that's why it's different than a prayer, because prayer is, we don't have it yet, we hope we'll get it. Blessing is, you have the potential, we're drawing it down. We're bringing it into the real world. It's in your hands. You could make it happen because it's in your potential.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to read the next verse, and the next verse seems like a very simple verse, but if you look at the history of this family, the next verse is revolutionary. I'm referring, of course, to verse 28. Sounds like a very just summing up, but like I said, there's a lot here. Let's see if we can do this. Verse 28. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father spoke to them and blessed them. Each man according to his blessing, he blessed them. Right. So we are on 283. What are we saying? He's saying that, okay, these are the 12 sons of Israel, and this is the father blessed them. He blessed each one according to his blessing. By the way, this is really what I said earlier, a few moments ago. It says he blessed them, each man according to his blessing, he blessed them. Isn't that superfluous? Each man according to his blessing, he blessed them. We know he gave each one a blessing. Isn't that enough? So we're saying, no, we're saying each man, he blessed him according to the blessing he already possesses, according to the potential that he already possesses. That is how he blessed him. In other words, the blessing is to really penetrate and figure out and try to investigate what is this person's potential. And then you give them a compliment, you give them a blessing, you give them encouragement to pursue that. And hopefully that gives them the inspiration and makes it easier for it to come from the state of potential to the state of the actual. Okay, going back to the verse. So we look at this family. This is a very interesting family. When you look at the history of the family of the Jewish people up to this point, we're in the conclusion of the book of Genesis. From the beginning of the family, but you can even argue that it's really from the beginning of the story of humanity, which is in the beginning of the book of Genesis, not just from the third parsha of Lech Lecha, where we start talking about the stories of Abraham. So what you see across the board is that there's a family, within a family, there are individuals who are selected to carry the torch of morality and the teachings, and only a branch of the family is really selected for the task of perpetuating the legacy of that family. And you can go back all the way to Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve have 3 children. Ultimately, the one that's chosen is Seth. Then you have Noach. Noach also has 3 sons. Ultimately, the one who's chosen is Shem. From amongst Shem's family, you have a few generations, and then you get to Abraham. And Abraham has 2 wives and 2 sons. Ultimately, Isaac is selected. Isaac has 1 wife, and they have twins. You could say twins, they're so close together. Probably you would guess that both of them would be selected to bear the legacy. No, it's not Isaac, it's Jacob. And at this point, Jacob, so what do you expect? You expect that one child would be selected to carry the legacy of the patriarchs and matriarchs of the monotheism of the Jewish people. And by the way, that's, according to some opinions, that's really what the source of the tension of the story of Joseph and his brothers. When the brothers see that Joseph is being favored, they see that as a spiritual threat to them. And that's why they want to get rid of Joseph at any expense, including what they go, ultimately they tried to kill him. And then if they can't kill him, they sell him as a slave. Why is he such a threat? So your father bought your brother a more expensive suit. Who cares? Okay, it creates jealousy, but why is this so extreme? I mean, I think some of my brothers were treated better than I, perhaps, maybe. I don't want to do confessions here on Father's Day, but I'm not gonna. I never woke up and say, "Oh, I have to sell my brother as a slave because my mother bought him a more expensive suit." Right? So what's happening here? So what's happening here is that the brothers look at the history of the family and they say, if Joseph will be selected, that means they are being rejected. They are being rejected from being part of the legacy and the family and the teachings of the Jewish people. So for them, Joseph is a terrible threat. What do you see in this story of the blessings of the 12 sons? And even more so in verse 28, there's a new pattern. All these, Kol Elah, all these are the tribes of Israel, 12. There's no longer one son being selected. Now we have 12 tribes of Israel. We have multiple families and therefore multiple perspectives and multiple missions, really, within the Jewish people. And all of them work together for the greater good, and they become one people. And it's just a big deal because that's not what happened up until this point. Up until this point, there was one person that in that generation was the bearer of the legacy. And now it becomes 12. And now we understand that there are different people have to do different things for a society is more complex now. For the society to thrive, different categories of different groups of Jewish people have to excel in different areas to be able to work together ultimately to fulfill the Jewish mission. So it's not about who is right. Is it the farmer? Is it the warrior? Is it the Torah scholar? Is it the merchant? What's the right path? And the answer is there is no, or the answer is there is no right path. There's 12 sons and there's 12 tribes, and each has a separate blessing, a distinct blessing. And nevertheless, they're all 12 comprise the Jewish people. So that's the first point that you get from verse 20 to 28, which is, like I said, to us it doesn't sound such a like a novelty, but for the people listening to it at the time, that was a big deal, because it broke the pattern of the entire book of Genesis the last few hundred years. And now you have a very interesting Rashi.
Rabbi,
Yes.
my question is this. One of the brilliant things you do is to contemporize everything. In a family like yours, did your father give a different blessing to each of the children based on his knowledge of who they were?
I'm not going to say he gave a different blessing, but I'm saying there certainly was the idea that there were different expectations for different children, and they allowed every child to thrive. And we have quite a variety of personalities. And I'm one of 10. So that's, you're going to get a variety of personalities. It reminds me of a funny essay I read on Chabad.org. I should clarify. I didn't read the essay. I read the title. The title was a great title. You didn't have to read the essay. The title was, there's a rabbi in Australia. It says he has 14 children. I knew some of his children. So he says, before I got married, I had 14 theories of education. He says, now I have 14 children and 0 theories. that was that. So the idea is that let different children express themselves in different ways was certainly present. Absolutely.
From a Torah perspective, how early in life is one's essence determined?
I wouldn't say essence, but I would say personality. Personality very young. It's a very beautiful interpretation of Rabbi Shamshon Raphael Hirsch. And if you look at the birth of Jacob and Esav, so Jacob and Esav, they're twins. They have the same mother, the same father. You would expect that they would be similar. And yet they could not turn out more differently, not just even physically, they look different. They were not identical. They look different, and also certainly spiritually and emotionally, what they were drawn to. Jacob was drawn to study, and Esav was drawn to hunting. Obviously, clearly a different personality. So the verses describe how they grow older, and the verse says, "Vayigdelu hane'arim." The lads grow up, and behold, Vahi Esav. Esav becomes a lad who knows how to hunt, is in the fields, and Jacob is a wholesome man sitting in the tents. Okay, beautiful verse. They grow up and they diverge. Rabbi Shamshon Raphael Hirsch says, no, this is a problem. This is a critique of Isaac and Jacob. Isaac and Jacob did not realize that the children are different until they grew up. Once they grew up and they were out of the house and they went to different directions, that's when the parents realized that they're different. Rabbi Shamshon Raphael Hirsch says the problem was that no one noticed that different until they grew up. What they should have done is noticed when they were younger that they're different, and therefore that doesn't mean that they're not going to direct them to the moral path, but it means that you're going to speak to them differently, and you're going to tailor the message to them not in the same way, because not all of them are inspired by the same things, not all of them value the same things. So if you're going to educate a child and you're going to educate all the children exactly the same, which unfortunately a lot of times that's what people do, because it's, first of all, it's easier. Second of all, we don't have manpower, we don't have time, we don't have patience. So there's a lot of reasons why we do this. But the reality is that, according to Rabbi Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, the Torah is indicating if you don't realize that your children are different until they grow up and move out of the house, that means that as a parent, you were not thinking about them as what is their individual language, what is their individual perspective, how do we tailor the message to their personality. So it's Father's Day, so I'm not going to say I'm good at this, but I'm saying this is what I should be doing.
Yeah, I used to always compare my kids to each other.
Right. It's the natural thing to do.
Grow up, and now I understand, like, everyone has a whole different soul.
Right.
Just because they're grown up in the same environment doesn't mean a thing.
Right. And a lot of times it's hard because you want to compare your children to yourself. Right? You say, I wanted to, that's another problem. I'm letting them have their own language. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't want to give your values to your children. You have a responsibility to, right? But the question is how it's done and how you speak to them. And some kids are going to prefer to be playing in the field, and some kids are going to be preferring to read books. And you have to talk to them differently. So that is a little bit about the blessings. Okay, so he blesses each one according to his blessing. So there's some interesting Rashis here. Rashi's saying two different things. Very interesting. Let's see if we can break this verse down. So first thing Rashi says, we have a problem. Three of these tribes were not blessed. Jacob offered rebuke. So Rashi says at this point, Jacob comes back and blesses all of his children. So even the children that he did not bless earlier are blessed now. That's the first order of business that Rashi addresses. Don't think that Reuven and Shimon and Levi were not blessed. No, they were also blessed, even though earlier he didn't bless them. But that's what he says. This is what their father spoke to them and blessed them. So they were all blessed. So that's what Rashi says. Now, is it not so that some of them he did not bless, but in fact chided? Rather, this is what is intended. And this is what their father spoke to them, what is related in this section. In other words, up till this point, what we read earlier in the verses, one might think that he did not bless Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Therefore, scripture states, and he blessed them, meaning all of them. Ultimately, they were all blessed. And then it says, according to his blessing, with the blessing destined to befall each of them. So this is very interesting. He's saying Jacob blesses them with the blessing that they're destined to receive. So if they're destined to receive, why does he have to bless them? So I think that's what we were mentioning earlier from the Kabbalistic perspective, that a blessing is giving you that which is in your perspective, potential. So it's destined to happen to you. But I don't know about the English word for destined, but in Hebrew, or in other words, conceptually, from the Jewish perspective, just because something is destined to happen to you, it doesn't mean it will. I know it doesn't fit with the word destiny, which means it has to happen. But the point here is, when God blesses you with the potential that this should happen, it may or may not come into fruition. That's where your free choice comes in. So that's what he's saying. He's blessing them that their potential be fulfilled, but ultimately it's up to them. And finally, he blessed each according to the blessing, he blessed them. Should have said each according to the blessing, to his blessing, he blessed him, right? Each according to his blessing, he blessed him. Why does it say he blessed them? So here Rashi says a beautiful point. So let's read the Rashi. Scripture should have said, each man according to his blessing, he blessed him. Why does scripture say he blessed them? Since Jacob bestowed upon Judah the might of a lion, and upon Benjamin the power to seize like a wolf, and upon Naphtali the fleetness of a gazelle, I might think that he did not include all of them in the blessing, in all the blessings. Therefore, scripture states he blessed them from Tanchuma, Vayechi. He blessed them. What is Rashi saying, quoting the Medrash? Rashi saying, make no mistake. Yes, Judah gets his own blessing and Benjamin gets his own blessing, etc. But at the end, he basically says everybody gets everybody's blessing. Well, if everybody gets everybody's blessing, why do you have to first bless each one individually? Just say, these are my 12 blessings, they're for everybody. So, of course, the answer is that no. Judah has a certain quality, and this is the dominant quality within Judah. But the point is, the rest of the tribes can get this quality from Judah, and the same with all the various tribes. In other words, you have your quality, but if you're part of the Jewish people, you can also benefit and you can adapt the certain quality that maybe is not dominant in your lifestyle and is dominant in a different tribe's lifestyle, but you can also incorporate some of that into your lifestyle. Generally speaking, the Rebbe would always say, generally speaking, in the Talmud, the Jewish people are divided into two. The Jewish people are divided into people who are primarily, their service is doing good deeds, and then people who study Torah all day, which was always historically the great minority, overwhelming minority of people study Torah. And most of the people were engaged in business, and with those opportunities, they could engage in good deeds. So, go ahead.
A question. So often, at least early on, we're taught there's the good and the bad. There's Jacob and there's Esau, there's Cain and there's Abel. And I think what I hear you say today, which is I think very special, is one tribe isn't any better than the other. Each has a very special quality. The challenge is to fulfill it, and none are better than the others.
Right. So the challenge is to fulfill it, and the challenge is to realize, each tribe realize that what I'm trying to excel at is what I'm supposed to be excelling at, but have respect that the other tribe is supposed to excel at something else. And then the next step is, could I incorporate some of their talent, and could they incorporate some of my talents? And that's very difficult for people to do. If you want to talk about if you want to put a positive perspective on contemporary Israel, where there's great division, and the division is not the problem, but the problem is sometimes you see animosity, and you see anger, and you see, I don't want to say the word hate because it's an extreme word, but maybe you see some of that. So what's the positive of that? Where does it come from? So I think the positive is that every group in society is so committed to what they believe is the most important value that they only see that value, and they see all other values as detracting from this value. And therefore, of course, I hate you because you are contradicting my value, and you're not fully invested in my value the same way that I'm invested in that value. Whatever that is, security, democracy, civil rights, whatever it may be, you have your perspective of what's the most important value. And you're so committed to it that you don't see value in other people doing other things. So in a way, it comes from a good place. It comes from a great commitment to your own value system. But the reality is, if you want to have an operating country, you have to have different people with different value systems, because not everybody could be, everyone's committed to one value and at the expense of all others, society breaks down. So we need different groups of people being committed to different specific values, and all those values coming together creates a healthy, balanced society. But to do that, you have to realize that just because for me this is the most important thing, I understand for my neighbor something else is the most important thing. Right? I don't want to get political here, but I'll stop here. I'll go back to the Torah and then go back to maybe go back to politics after we turn off the recording. I'm kidding. When you go back to the Torah, so there's 12 tribes of Israel, there's 12 ways of serving God. Generally speaking, you could break down to two: people who are studying Torah, people who are doing good deeds. So what the Rebbe would always say, how does it look like that Judah gets the blessing of a different tribe, but has its own dominant tribe, but yet he could benefit from the other blessings? So to speak practically, there are some people who study old Torah all day. In their world, the only thing that exists is Torah. Most people are not, I'm not going to say that, most people, that's not what's required from them. That's not their goal in life. That's not what God wants of them. However, they too could be blessed with that blessing. In this case, it's the blessing of Yisachar, which is interpreted as the people who are devoted to the yoke of Torah. So Levi or Yisachar, right? You have the historically, there was always understood that people always had an agreement between Yisachar and Zvulun. Zvulun was in commerce, Yisachar was Torah study. The Zvulun engaged in commerce, supported the Torah scholars, and the scholar merit would go to the business person. You had an agreement like that between Rambam, Maimonides, and his brother. I believe his name was David, who was a great merchant, until tragically his merchant brother perished at sea in the Indian Ocean with all his fortune. And that caused Maimonides to have to support himself and his brother's family. And then he went into medicine, and that's how he supported himself. But before that, you have this agreement. So you have this agreement between Yisachar and Zvulun. Zvulun does the commerce, Yisachar studies Torah. Okay. The big idea here is, yes, you're studying Torah all day, and the other guy is doing mitzvot all day, doing good deeds out in the world. But we know that everybody has to have everybody's blessing. So it's not only that the business person also has to study a few minutes a week or a few minutes a day. That's a given. It's that when you study Torah, even though you're a busy person, and you only put 15 minutes on your calendar for study of Torah because you have 10 meetings that lined up after that, in those 10 minutes, you study Torah like Yisachar, meaning as if you have no other occupation. Right? So that was the idea, that the other tribe, the tribe that's blessed with Torah study, gives you their blessing. They do it all day. you do it for 10 minutes. But in those 10 minutes, you're studying Torah as if this is the most important value, as if there's nothing else that you have to do, as if there's no other distractions. And the vice versa. When a person's studying Torah all day, does a mitzvah, he doesn't just do a mitzvah because, oh, I have to go volunteer in the soup kitchen because it's a mitzvah I have to do, but I'd rather we go back and study. No, when you do this mitzvah, you're completely invested in that mitzvah. So that's how you can have 12 tribes. Each one gets one blessing because that's the dominant aspect of their spiritual, their personality, their portion of the land of Israel, but their spiritual mission. And yet you could say every person gets all 12 because in some level, every tribe has to incorporate all the tribes. They can't do it fully, they can't do it full time, but in the moments that they're doing what the other tribe is doing, they do it fully and they do it completely. And in that sense, every tribe has the blessings of all the tribes. So that's a little bit about the 12 tribes. We conclude with this. From here until the end of the book of Genesis, which is another chapter, and a little bit, you have Jacob preparing for his passing, and ultimately the passing of Jacob and the passing of Joseph, which seems to be a little bit melancholy. But of course, we're going to look at the positive and see what is the Torah telling us about the Jewish people and about the preparation for the ability to survive the Egyptian exile by seeing how Jacob and Joseph prepare their family for what's going to unfold. So that's the story in short. Thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the day, and we should meet each other in good health.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi. Happy Father's Day to every male, and have a great Sunday.